Of the 7 forms of lightsaber combat, many have one well-known master of the form, a practitioner whose technique was so advanced that none ever surpassed it. Obi-Wan Kenobi was considered the master of Form 3, as Count Dooku was the master of Form 2, and Mace Windu was the master of Form 7. But there was one form of lightsaber combat that had no true master, Form 6, also known as Niman. Though it was a fairly common form among the Jedi, it's probably the most obscure of the 7 forms, the least flashy and the least distinctive. Only a few notable characters are said to have practiced it, and unlike all 6 of the other forms, it doesn't play a prominent role in any of the expanded universe's many novels or other stories. But Niman was still a unique and highly interesting combat style, and it lacked a master not because the Jedi weren't interested in the form, but because it wasn't a form that was possible to truly master. In this video, we'll be explaining why.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
Niman's origins actually go back to an age before the invention of the lightsaber, to the Real Machiteros of the Kashima dynasty, an isolationist human civilization in the Outer Rim that predated the formation of the Republic. The original Niman style was used in conventional sword fighting, and it was named for the dual triumvirates of deities that the Kashima worshipped. Niman developed as a combat style meant to be used alongside the Breath, the Kashima name for the Force. When the Kashima home system was destroyed by a supernova shortly after the formation of the Republic, the original version of Niman became more obscure, but one notable Kashima exile breathed new life into the style: the Jedi Knight, Zendor. Zendor, as you may know, fell to the dark side and began the Jedi Order's first great schism circa 24,500 years before the Battle of Yavin, raising an army of dark Jedi known as the Legions of Leto. Zendor was a Niman practitioner, and he taught the style to his followers, leading to many legionnaires using Niman in battles against the Jedi. The Legions of Leto were quickly crushed by the Jedi, and Zendor was killed in the fighting, but after their defeat, the Jedi adopted Niman themselves, and the form morphed into a Jedi sword fighting technique. When the Jedi began the transition to using lightsabers, Niman was one of the styles that influenced the development of lightsaber combat, and eventually, it morphed into its own lightsaber combat style. The modern version of Niman was a hybrid style, incorporating not only elements of the original Niman style, but also elements of all 5 previous lightsaber forms, with the exception of Form 2, as well as the ancient Atrizian fighting style Jar-Kai. Form 3 had the greatest influence on Form 6, but it was still a unique style, one that soon became popular among the Jedi, especially in peacetime. Also known as the Way of the Rancor, the Moderation form, and the Diplomat's form, Form 6 was a very balanced form that lacked both any major strengths and any major weaknesses. It was highly practical and applicable in a wide variety of situations, and while it couldn't compete with the other forms when it came to their specialties, it was broadly useful in far more situations than any other form. While some of the more specialized forms left their users exposed and vulnerable in certain situations, as we've discussed with a few of the forms in the past, Niman never did. It aimed for moderation between the various strengths of the other combat forms, watering them down but still retaining their utility. It was especially suitable for Jedi with unique and unconventional approaches to combat. The goals of Niman were balance and flexibility in combat, avoiding the rigidity of other forms at the cost of their specialization. It achieved moderation between all the different elements of combat, between offense and defense, acrobatics and footwork, precision and strength. It could easily be adapted to work with new combat elements, such as unconventional lightsaber styles or a duelist with an especially alien body plan, more easily than any other form. Most importantly, it allowed the duelist to personalize it. While Niman was often seen as a jack of all trades, master of none style, it did have one unique strength. It was essentially a blank slate. Instead of having a distinct identity, it allowed users to build their own identities into it. Niman was a conduit, reflecting the sensibilities and attitudes of its users and allowing them to utilize their strengths to the fullest. Niman also had a more relaxed focus on blade work than the other forms of lightsaber combat. It adopted the power blows of Form 5, the fast-paced action of Form 4, the defensive motions of Form 3, and the broad strokes of Form 1, but specific moves and maneuvers weren't really emphasized with Niman. In Form 6, the exact movements of combat weren't what was important, but rather maintaining balance and moderation. This made it arguably the most practical of the 7 forms, but also one that could easily be outcompeted by more disciplined forms. In a one-on-one lightsaber duel, a Form 2 practitioner could handily beat all but the greatest Form 6 practitioners. This simplicity meant that the most basic form of Niman was the easiest lightsaber fighting style to get the hang of, and once a Jedi had the basics of Form 6 down, they wouldn't have to practice it all that often to keep their skills sharp. This led some Jedi battle masters to criticize Niman as insufficiently demanding, but it also made Form 6 very popular among Jedi consulars who devoted most of their time to diplomacy, academic work, and study of Force techniques. Niman allowed consulars and other Jedi that didn't see combat very often to remain combat ready without eating up huge amounts of their time with constant training. But while Form 6 was easy to get the hang of, it was much harder to achieve the higher levels of the form. Sindralik, the Jedi Order's battlemaster during the Clone Wars, estimated that it took over a decade of study to truly master Niman. To do so required the user to achieve perfect balance between the different elements of the form, to understand them all without letting any of them feature too prominently in their blade work so as to maintain the form's moderation. Niman specialists had to learn how to create a strong defense without sacrificing offense, how to be quick and mobile without sacrificing stability and resilience, and how to overpower an opponent while still maintaining precision. One of the most distinctive attributes of Niman was that it encouraged its practitioners to incorporate force-based attacks into their combat cadences. While all lightsaber forms drew on the Force, most duelists used the Force primarily to strengthen their blade work, whereas Niman practitioners would mix Force pushes, pulls, and other telekinetic applications of the Force in their slashes and stabs, essentially using the Force as a secondary weapon alongside their lightsaber instead of using the Force to amplify their skill with that lightsaber. Two notable Niman moves that exemplified this tendency were Draw Closer, in which the duelist would use a Force pull to drag an opponent into lightsaber range, and Pushing Slash, in which the duelist would inflict a hit on the enemy and then immediately toss them out of the fray with a Force push. These two maneuvers were especially suitable for battles against multiple enemies, in which finding ways to quickly and efficiently defeat opponents and then get them out of your way one at a time could be advantageous. Form 6 was often described as completely lacking strengths or weaknesses, but that wasn't entirely true. It just didn't have any major strengths or weaknesses. Niman's lack of major weaknesses was a strength in itself, as was its flexibility and practicality. The way the form needed to be adapted to fit the user could be either a strength or a weakness, and it underperformed in large battles and lightsaber duels. Every Form 6 practitioner who fought in the Battle of Geonosis was killed, and Niman was often neglected in wartime due to how unsuitable it could be for some battlefield conditions. But none of these strengths or weaknesses were universal due to how different Form 6 could be from user to user. Some practitioners turned it into a highly effective dueling or battlefield form, as we'll discuss later, eliminating those two weaknesses. Form 6 was also the most suitable lightsaber combat form for use with multiple lightsabers or dual-bladed lightsabers. The Jedi considered dual wielding to be its own technique, which they named Jar Kai, after a dual wielding style prominent among the elite swordsmen of the Kittel Fard. Jar'kai could be adapted to any form of lightsaber combat, but it worked best with Niman, as the original Kashima Niman technique was also a dual blade style. Most dual wielders in the Jedi Order studied Form 6 in order to develop a working knowledge of Jar'kai before adapting it to other forms, and some used Niman specifically because of how well it worked with dual blades. Jar'kai allowed its masters to maintain a strong and fast-paced offensive, and dual-wielding masters could easily overwhelm an unprepared opponent. Traditional Jar'kai saw one blade used to parry the attacks of an opponent, while the other was used offensively, but many duelists used both blades offensively to maintain a constant, overpowering stance. Skilled Jar'kai duelists would create a virtual whirlwind with their lightsabers, creating a defensive screen that few enemies could pierce and an offense that fewer still could stand their ground against. Jar'kai was also well suited to use against multiple opponents, as it gave a duelist more blades to parry or attack with. Of course, Jar'kai had weaknesses as well. The gyroscopic nature of lightsabers made dual wielding very awkward, hence the need for a special discipline for it, though a trained duelist could easily overcome this. A more critical weakness was that Jar'kai fighters were unable to use two-handed strikes or power attacks, as they were unable to put all their strength behind the blow. Some Jar'kai practitioners, most notably General Grievous, were strong enough that this weakness didn't apply, but most were not. This wasn't just a detriment to offense, but also to defense, as an opponent using power attacks could easily batter their way through a dual wielder's defenses. Many Jedi who mastered Jar'kai also tended to neglect the use of the Force in combat, focus too much on their lightsabers, and/or end up relying too much on having two sabers, leaving them vulnerable if they lost one. Many Jedi who practiced Jar'kai carried one regular lightsaber and a short lightsaber, as a shoto in the offhand was easier to control than a full-sized saber. Jar'kai was also applicable to the use of dual-bladed lightsabers, and Pong Krell even dual-wielded dual-bladed lightsabers. Mara's Brood utilized Jar'kai with two guard shotos, an unusual saber variant that positioned the blade parallel to the wielder's forearms. Some of these variants, as well as the use of the Jar'kai technique in general, was actually frowned upon by some Jedi, who viewed dual wielding as overly heterodox and out of keeping with the Jedi way. Some of these snobs saw the use of multiple lightsabers as barbaric and uncivilized, as was the case for Jedi Master turned Sith Lord Dooku, who believed that any true duelist should be able to make do with just one saber. Others criticized Jar'kai for how its adherents tended to focus too much on their blades and too little on the Force, leaving themselves vulnerable in the process and steering them away from the Jedi Code. Jar'kai was useful for a variety of specialized applications. Luke Skywalker learned the style for use as a counter to Lumiya's use of the light whip, and it became his preferred method for dealing with whip wielders going forward, as he could entangle the whip with one blade and attack with the other. Other Jedi, such as Aayla Secura, used it for crowd control in chaotic battles, while others used Jar'kai situationally to even the odds against a tough opponent or disorient an opponent they'd been fighting with one blade up to that point. Some Jedi with more than one pair of arms, such as the six-armed Jedi Master Squelly, carried more than two blades, taking advantage of their anatomy to become even more overwhelming and difficult to manage in combat. As Form 6 focused on balance and moderation in combat, studying it helped Jar'kai users better balance their two weapons, eliminating many of the weaknesses that were usually endemic to two-weapon fighting. Many of the same principles also applied to the use of the dual-bladed lightsaber, as demonstrated by the dual-bladed saber's inventor, the Niman specialist, Exar Kun. Dual-bladed lightsabers lacked the strength disadvantage of dual wielding, while still allowing duelists to maintain faster-paced cadences than a single blade, but they also had challenges of their own, as they could limit mobility, prevent duelists from pulling off certain maneuvers, and they needed good balance to use well. Niman's inherent balance helped offset these difficulties, allowing Form 6 duelists to use saber staffs with the same effectiveness as single-bladed lightsabers. All told, Form 6 was fairly simple in principle, but it was deceptively difficult to pull off in its higher forms, and as we mentioned earlier, it was a form that lacked a single definitive master. This was because of an aspect of Niman that we mentioned earlier. It was a blank slate, and its nature could change significantly based on what a duelist put into it. Form 6 was so flexible that mastery of it looked very different from duelist to duelist, and different styles of Niman combat were so distinct that they could be like different forms entirely. Above all, Niman's effectiveness was dependent on the creativity and intuition of the wielder and how quickly they could adapt to it in a new situation. The flexibility Form 6 offered was extreme, but few duelists were skilled enough to be able to take full advantage of it. The more adaptable and unpredictable they could be, the more effective they would be with the style. The potential Niman had for a practitioner was unique based on their own strengths, weaknesses, and approach to combat, and to really understand the breadth of this form, we need to take a closer look at some specific Form 6 duelists. There were many Form 6 duelists running around at the time of the Clone Wars, and Niman was generally popular throughout its history, especially during times of peace, when Jedi could expect to only use their lightsabers against common thugs. During the Great Peace of the Republic, the Jedi Council actually encouraged study of Form 6 over the other forms, and the Jedi Battlemaster at the time of the Clone Wars, Sin Dralik, considered Niman the most practical form. As we already mentioned, Niman was very popular among Jedi consulars, but Jedi of other disciplines often favored it as well. During the Old Sith Wars, for instance, Niman was considered an advanced form taught to Jedi Sentinels and Jedi Watchmen, as its focus on moderation and balance reflected the philosophy of those two disciplines within the Order. For many of these Jedi, consulars especially, Niman was essentially used as a crutch, a form that allowed them to use a lightsaber effectively on the rare occasions that they needed to. These Jedi put nothing else into the form, and so their version of Form 6 was very lackluster, and it performed worse than most other forms would in many situations. It was sufficient for use in brief skirmishes with criminals, but in lightsaber duels or full-scale battles, Jedi who used Niman in this way were often failed by it. The Jedi Knights Sarissa Jeng and Sar Labuda used Niman as a crutch in this way, as lightsaber combat wasn't a primary focus for them. As a consequence, when the two of them joined the mission to Geonosis to rescue Padme Amidala, Anakin Skywalker, and Obi-Wan Kenobi from public execution, their technique proved insufficient to handle the vast hordes of battle droids they were up against, and both of them were killed. Another Niman specialist who fell on Geonosis was Jokla Dunva, who, unlike Jeng and Labuda, was actually an accomplished duelist. Danva was skilled in the rare martial art Teras Kasi, as well as in lightsaber combat, and he was one of the Jedi Order's most gifted Jarkai specialists, though he often fought with a single blade anyway. Danva's skill with Form 6 was such that, even against overwhelming numbers in the Geonosis arena, he survived most of the arena battle. Danva was killed in the end, but less due to deficiencies in his technique, and more because he was caught off guard while running to a gunship to escape the arena. But other Jedi that focused on Niman developed it more extensively and were able to get much better results from it in battle. One such example was Johun Othone, the Padawan of the famed Jedi Lord Hoth, the founder and leader of the Army of Light during the final years of the New Sith Wars. Othone fought alongside Hoth in many battles against the Brotherhood of Darkness, including the harrowing 7th Battle of Ruusan, and his skill with Form 6 proved highly effective against the armies of Sith. While little is known of Othone's battlefield service, it's proof that Niman wasn't always a detriment in a full-scale battle, even if none of the Niman practitioners on Geonosis survived. In the years that followed the 7th Battle of Ruusan, Johun Othone served as a bodyguard for Supreme Chancellor Tarsus Valorum. During this period, Othone fell out of practice a little, and Niman started to become more of a crutch for him than a form he focused on. Nonetheless, he remained sufficiently skilled with the form to play a key part in the team of 5 Jedi that confronted Darth Bane and Darth Xana on Tython in 990 BBY. Othone was a bit of a weak link in the team, but he was still the last of the Jedi strike team to be killed, outlasting more powerful Jedi through his skill with Niman. On the battlefields of the Sith Wars, Niman often held its own, and though it was often thought of as a peacetime fighting style, the Jedi still encouraged its use during wartime. During the Jedi Civil War and its aftermath, the Jedi Masters Kavar, Zez Kael, and Vruk Lamar all made Niman part of their repertoire, which served them well on the battlefields of the war and while hiding from the Sith during its aftermath. At this time in the Order's history, Niman was thought of as an advanced form, and it was highly valued for its flexibility and all-round utility. Kreia considered it one of the greatest of the Jedi fighting techniques, since, in the right hands, it could be made useful in virtually any situation. The Jedi archaeologist, Rachi Sitra, was also a Niman specialist, and unlike many Jedi, she devoted a lot of time and effort into mastering the form, becoming among the most skilled Form 6 duelists in the Jedi Order. Sitra leaned hard into Niman's focus on incorporating telekinetic force attacks into one's blade work, which made her an unpredictable and highly dangerous combatant. Her skill with Niman helped her survive Order 66 at the end of the Clone Wars, and she remained at large for far longer than most Order 66 survivors. Sitra was still around at the time of the Battle of Yavin, which inspired her to come out of hiding and join up with Corellian rebels on Talos. She led rebel forces to victory in a few battles, and she even survived a duel with Darth Vader, a testament to her skill with the lightsaber. Perhaps the best example of Form 6's flexibility, however, were the Sith who chose to specialize in it. While this generalized, moderation-focused form, the preferred technique of Jedi diplomats, might seem an odd choice for the Sith, the way Niman was personalized to its users allowed the greatest of the Sith to turn it into a weapon more effective than any of the offensive lightsaber forms. During the Jedi Civil War, Form 6 was studied by the Sith assassins, while during the New Sith Wars, the Blade Master of the Korriban Academy, Lord Qasim, was also highly skilled with Niman, and especially with Jar Kai. In the hands of these Sith, Niman became much more aggressive and vicious, but without sacrificing defense like some of the more overtly offensive styles did. However, the most well-known Sith Master of Niman, as well as perhaps the most accomplished Form 6 duelist of all time, was Exar Kun, the Dark Lord who unleashed the Great Sith War on the galaxy. Exar Kun studied Niman while he was a Jedi, and he adapted the form to his preferred fighting style. Kun was an extremely aggressive duelist, even as a Jedi, with a preference for vicious power attacks and unrestrained, strength-focused fighting. This style of combat might seem more suited to Form 4, 5, or 7, though Master Vodo never would have taught him that last one, but Exar Kun instead chose to focus on Niman, and it ended up being far more effective for him than any of those other forms would have been. Even as a Jedi, Exar Kun never really went in for the philosophy behind Form 6. Moderation was never really something he excelled at, but he was skilled at balancing the various aspects of the Niman style, and this allowed him to maintain his aggressive combat style without weakening his defense or leaving him vulnerable on other fronts, unlike the more aggressive lightsaber forms. Exar Kun took the blank slate of Niman and poured his aggression into it, and the result was a combat style that made Exar Kun the single deadliest lightsaber duelist of his time. Even as a Jedi Padawan, Kun was able to defeat his master, Vodo Siosk Bas, in a training duel, destroying Master Vodo's own weapon with his aggressive, heavy-handed tactics. In that particular duel, Exar Kun made use of another apprentice's lightsaber alongside his own, allowing him to take advantage of how well Niman paired with Jar Kai. Kun's force-enhanced strength allowed him to deliver fearsome power attacks with both sabers in rapid succession, battering down his opponent's guard without giving them a chance to recover or counterattack. Such a heavy focus on offense would ordinarily leave a duelist exposed, especially given Jarkai's weaknesses against power attacks from an opponent, but again, Exar Kun's grasp of Niman allowed him to maintain a degree of balance and keep up a strong defense. Exar Kun later pioneered Form 6's use with a new lightsaber variant that he invented after becoming Dark Lord of the Sith, the double-bladed lightsaber. Kun applied his approach to Jarkai to the use of this new weapon, allowing him to maintain an even more aggressive offense that doubled as an extremely effective defensive screen. Kun's saber staff allowed him to apply more strength to his attacks than ordinary dual-wielding did, allowing the Dark Lord to make use of both a fast-paced attack pattern and extremely heavy-handed power attacks. Kun's saber staff was also designed so that the Sith Lord could change the lengths and intensities of each blade individually, which he used to disorient his opponents and throw them off balance, something that was in keeping with Niman's encouragement of improvisation and adaptability. As a Sith Lord, Exar Kun dropped all pretense of balance from his philosophy, but Niman's push toward moderation continued to balance out his fighting style, making him almost impossible to beat. He killed his own master, one of the greatest Jedi Guardians of the age, in a lightsaber duel, and he was never once defeated himself. Exar Kun wasn't the only Sith Lord to study Niman either. Darth Maul, who took after Exar Kun in his use of the double-bladed lightsaber, learned Form 6 from Darth Sidious, and though Maul specialized in the use of Form 7 instead, he still incorporated many aspects of Form 6 into his combat style, including the use of telekinetic attacks during lightsaber combat. Niman helped Maul better master the use of the double-bladed lightsaber, and like with Exar Kun, Form 6 helped Maul become a deadly aggressive duelist without leaving him overly vulnerable to counterattack. These traits were a large part of what made Maul so effective in his duel with Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi on Naboo, enabling him to tear through the defenses of Qui-Gon's Ataru form and then adapt to Obi-Wan's aggressive, fast-paced counterattack. During the Clone Wars, one of the most accomplished Jedi practitioners of Form 6 was Asherad Het, a Jarkai duelist who killed thousands of opponents and survived countless battles, as well as Order 66, through his skill with Niman. Later in life, after succumbing to the dark side, Het took the mantle of Darth Krayt, declaring himself the Dark Lord of the One Sith. Darth Krayt was considered a pretender to the Sith by the spirits of virtually all the ancient Sith Lords he consulted, but his skill with the lightsaber was unquestioned, and Niman remained his lightsaber form of choice even after his fall to the dark side. Darth Krayt used Niman with both a single lightsaber and two lightsabers, and he was extremely effective with both. Darth Krayt used Niman in much the same way as Exar Kun. He was extremely aggressive, but his command of Form 6 allowed him to keep up a strong defense while unleashing withering power attacks with both sabers. Using the Force to amplify his fury and strength, Darth Krayt was able to battle younger and stronger opponents into submission, even while his body was ravaged by Yuuzhan Vong parasites at the advanced age of 170. His skill was such that he could take on multiple lightsaber-wielding, Force-using Imperial Knights at once and kill them all in a matter of minutes. And neither Jedi nor Sith could match him in battle until the Vong parasites infesting his body began to severely weaken him. As Asherad Het, he had used Niman to defeat the skilled ex-Jedi assassin Aurra Sing in a lightsaber duel, which was no small feat, given that Sing had defeated his father, who was a skilled Jedi Knight in his own right. As Darth Krayt, he was able to inflict severe damage on Abeloth, sapping her power and inflicting grievous wounds on the Bringer of Chaos herself. He held his own against the revived Karnus Mur, one of the first ever Sith Lords, and he also handily defeated Darth Wirlock, his former Shadowhand and one of the greatest of the One Sith. Darth Krayt, like Exar Kun, was a fearsome example of what Form 6 could be in the hands of a Sith Lord. A killing style more powerful than even the most aggressive lightsaber forms. But though the most advanced known Niman practitioners were Sith who warped Form 6 into an aggressive and violent style, the Jedi could also use it to similarly great effect, and they could do so while retaining Niman's core philosophy of balance and moderation. It could be used to efficiently defeat an enemy without leaning too hard into aggression, to mount a strong defense without becoming overly passive, or to incorporate more creative uses of the Force into combat without sacrificing focus on the lightsaber. Philosophically, Niman was among the most Jedi-like of the 7 forms, as it encouraged focus on the ultimate goal the will of the Force had for the universe: balance. As instruments of the Force and agents of the light, the Jedi were called to maintain this balance, in part by destroying the servants of the dark side and the bringers of injustice, and this was one of the tasks Jedi carried lightsabers for. Some Jedi could get so caught up in this goal that they lost the plot, giving into aggression and self-righteousness, sometimes facilitated by the more aggressive lightsaber forms. Other Jedi became so caught up in the Order's emphasis on peace and refraining from harming others unless necessary, they became downright passive, something that the more defensive lightsaber forms enabled. But Form 6, if honed properly, kept Jedi on the path of balance between these two impulses, allowing them to best serve the Force's purposes. Form 6 may not have been as flashy or as distinctive as the other 7 forms, but there's an argument to be made that its flexible and balanced nature made it the greatest of them all anyway. It had the simplicity of Form 1, but without the inflexibility. Precision of Form 2, but without the laser focus on one-on-one lightsaber dueling. The defensiveness of Form 3, but without being outright passive. The unpredictability of Form 4, but without wasting the user's energy. The aggression of Form 5, but with balance from other elements. And it encouraged focus on the Force, like Form 7, but without any of the dangers that form entailed. It took a little of everything, giving the Jedi all the tools they needed to win the day, if they were capable of keeping them all in balance. So, that's our look at Niman, the 6th form of lightsaber combat, and the only one with no true master. But what do you think? Would you like to see dedicated videos about any of the characters we mentioned here in the future? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section below. And as always guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.